I remember, according to estimations, Iran could have been an exporter of oil not longer than 1994, 1995, or maybe 2000. That means we had still oil, but...
Dr. Etemad was the father of Iran's nuclear power program in the 1970s. The foundation stones of the program were quickly laid, and European firms fell over each other looking for lucrative contracts.
If we started in '74, maybe after 2010, we would have had exactly all the industries in hand, all the technologies in hand to run a meaningful program.
Already a valued customer in other sectors, particularly military equipment, Iran was seen as a crucial market for sophisticated technologies.
Mr. Ben, you were Energy Minister for Britain in the 1970s, 30 years ago, and the British and the Iranian government at the time were collaborating on nuclear issues. I wonder if you could tell us about some of the collaboration that was going on between Britain and Iran.
Well, at that time, the Shah, who had been put on the throne in Tehran by the Americans, was advised that by the Americans that it would be a good idea if he had nuclear power. And I was sent to see him, and I saw him in 1976 in his palace in Tehran.
At this point, soon after the oil price shocks and before the public was aware of the dangers, nuclear energy was seen as holding the key to an independent future for energy-hungry societies.
The first people who were convinced that Iran does need nuclear power to generate electricity were the new conservatives in the US. The three key players under the Ford administration who convinced the Shah of Iran that Iran does need over 20 nuclear reactors were Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and Mr. Wolfowitz.
At the beginning, all the nuclear countries, they rushed into Iran. United States, France, Germany. All of them, they thought that Iran would be a good client for their technology.
Why was it that Britain collaborated with the Shah of Iran in his development of nuclear power?
Well, I think it was really a combination of industrial and military interests, because you see, I learned from experience that nuclear power in the eyes of the Americans was all about weapons. And therefore the Americans were promoting nuclear power for that reason. They couldn't get nuclear power easily in America. There was once a time when the Americans were talking about 2,000 nuclear reactors in the United States by the year 2000. But the American people wouldn't have it. And so they were looking for ways of generating or acquiring plutonium for their weapons program, and that was their main interest.
It is a big surprise that before the triumph of the revolution, Americans, Europeans had a lot of contracts with Iran, not only nuclear power, but they were interested to cooperate and to have contracts with Iran on different parts of the nuclear fuel cycle. It means from the uranium mines, exploration, exploitation, uranium conversion, enrichment as well. Therefore, there is a serious doubt about the intention of these countries questioning Iran's to go for nuclear.
The reason that we were involved was because the British government wanted nuclear power, and the American Westinghouse wanted their system, and the Shah had money and was a possible market. And so I suppose the idea was if we would adopt Westinghouse, the Shah would then build a Westinghouse reactor, and then as a result of that, he would order more Westinghouse reactors, and then the Shah offered to buy our nuclear industry if we did that. It was a very complicated system, which I was not in favor of.
Throughout its history, nuclear power has been linked to nuclear weapons, but that didn't seem to be a problem to the Iranian program in the 1970s. Ambitions were high, and the Shah was keen to see a rapid development that would ensure Iran was at the vanguard of the global nuclear power industry, and that oil and gas reserves were not exhausted.
Why that size of program? We did not think that we should have 20,000 megawatt or 30,000 megawatt and so on. The policy was that as soon as we find a site which is suitable, we would build nuclear power plants on that. This was not a political decision. This was a decision based on the possibilities of the country.
The program was still going strong when the country was rocked by revolution, and it was temporarily abandoned.
The other important point is the fact that Iran, during the last 3 decades, have tried its best to have a pragmatic approach, not ambitious approach. That is the reason that Iran, after the Islamic Revolution, they decided to only focus at the first on Bushehr power plant, the first unit, which was incomplete, and the Germans were not cooperating to complete it. And then gradually to mobilize and based on the infrastructure to go to the next steps.
When the Islamic Republic restarted the project in the 1980s, it attempted to do so without the same level of foreign assistance. We asked Iran's ambassador to the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna why this was.
In fact, we requested Germany to fulfill their commitment because they left Iran, and despite of the fact of billions of marks received, Deutschmark received, but they didn't complete this Bushehr power plant. And in many occasions, we approached Germany to complete it, and they didn't do it.
Article 4 of the NPT states that every signatory of NPT has every right to develop civilian nuclear technology for peaceful purposes, for generation of electricity and for medical uses. And all countries, signatories to NPT, should facilitate collaboration towards a peaceful nuclear technology for these countries.
Do you not think, given Iran's relationship with the rest of the world, they had to keep it secret?
Well, that's certainly what the Iranian officials have said. They said that they were forced to be secret because they were afraid that they wouldn't get any kind of external assistance if they were public about the program. Unfortunately, by keeping it secret, Iran violated its treaty commitments under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty.
For Tehran Research Reactor, since this is outdated, and we were worrying about the continuity of producing radioisotopes, they denied. We requested them even to have the light water reactor. They denied. Therefore, we had no choice to design for our own research reactor to produce radioisotopes.
Don't you think that Iran has the right to think that they cannot be trusted?
I realize that Iran looks at this history of having had its deal with Eurodif in France broken for various reasons in the aftermath of the revolution. It wasn't a totally one-sided breaking of the deal by the Europeans. Iran itself chose to back away from nuclear power. But I think it's understandable that Iran does have this sense that because of past difficulties, it needs to be self-sufficient.
It wasn't just the French and German companies. Iran was involved in collaboration with Argentina, with the Czech Republic, with Spain even, either with their governments or with companies. And under the pressure of the US, all these activities got nowhere, and all these companies and governments were forced under pressure to withdraw their support.
Iran is still 10% shareholder of Eurodif enrichment factory or company in France. More than 30 years ago, Shah gave, in fact, a financial assistance of $1 billion to this company.
That means we had the right to enrich our uranium there for at least 10% of the capacity of the plant. Still, Iran is a member of Eurodif.
As now, we have not received 1 gram of the output of this factory that we share this company's, in fact, output of this company. This is a real discrimination and deprivation of a country.
If the Europeans, they are sincere and they say, we provide you with the fuel, the first thing is the enrichment. Why France refuses Iran the enrichment capacity.
How sympathetic are you to the view that Iran has been a victim of de facto embargoes on nuclear technology for some time, which then therefore justifies its lack of transparency?
My personal view is that it was, insofar as there is no obligation under the NPT to provide such assistance or technology. I think that any country is aware of the uses that such technology could be put to. And if it does not have confidence, complete confidence, that it will be used for peaceful purposes, a country has the right to deny access to that technology.
I really don't understand Iran's logic to say that because it wasn't provided nuclear energy by countries that had valid reasons for concern, that it therefore had a right to violate its safeguards agreement. No, I think when a state signs a safeguards agreement, enters into an international commitment, it has to abide by the commitment. And I think Iranians realize that, that they made a mistake, that they should have reported what they were obliged to report under the conditions of its safeguards agreement.
This is the essence of the formal complaint against Iran. But also, why is it that Iran needs its own domestic supply of fuel at all when there is already a reliable international market? How can Iran today have any confidence in the promises from the international community of a continuous supply of nuclear fuel for its program?
I think that promise could be guaranteed by the UN Security Council, as well as the IAEA, which is prepared to act as a fuel bank to hold these fuel supplies so that Iran would have some confidence that it would get those materials for its nuclear power program.
As I'm talking to you right now, there is no single document or instrument legally binding, internationally recognized for assurance of a nuclear supply. In fact, 7 years of negotiation, intensive negotiation in the IAEA on assurance of a nuclear supply collapsed, total failure in 1987 in Vienna.
Iran claims its ambitions are entirely peaceful in both intent and in nature, yet other states, many with their own advanced nuclear industries, are clearly worried that the potential for Iran to use the technology to develop nuclear weapons is significant. I asked Mark Fitzpatrick to explain this perspective.
It seems that Iran is on a trajectory to obtain a nuclear weapons capability, if it chose to do so, within 4 to 10 years. The enrichment program that Iran is embarked upon and its interest in building a heavy water moderated research reactor at Iraq would give it fissile material production capabilities that could be put to weapons purposes. That's the concern.
Iran, by seeking to acquire this technology in a clandestine manner, the nature of the technology that they sought to acquire goes well beyond what might be required for a civil or peaceful nuclear program. And I think one of the concerns is that the technology that they have sought to acquire in a variety of ways is not necessarily consistent entirely with a peaceful nuclear program. And so that is obviously a cause for concern.
So the charge against Iran is that aspects of its nuclear program were not only kept secret for a time from International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors, but also that particular activities were more suited to developing nuclear weapons rather than an entirely civil program. We asked whether the agency had uncovered any concrete evidence of Iranian nuclear weapons program activities.
Do you think that IAEA has found a concrete evidence for Iranian to develop a nuclear weapon?
Well, first of all, that is a very, very big question, and I don't think that we actually are really on that business. If we had found, I tell honesty, something which we can step on to something which we say, okay, this must be a nuclear weapon project, you know that our obligation is to report immediately. And since we have not reported anything, you can conclude that at least so far we have not found such kind of evidence.
Well, I think the most important indication is that Iran began a secret program more than 20 years ago to develop the capacity to enrich uranium.
We can have the enrichment even to 93% or more. The only thing is to report the IAEA what is the specification of the facilities, and only inform the IAEA according to safeguard, comprehensive safeguard, 180 days before we use the material and put the material.
ما برای حل مسئله اتمی در هر زمان و هر مکان آماده ایم که مذاکرات سازنده‌ای داشته باشیم، اما این به معنای نیست که با نوعی بازی تفننی رسانه‌ای بخوان مسئله رو حل بکنن. احتیاج به یک منطق صحیح و یک اراده درست برای حل مسئله هست.
I think there's a gradual consensus building in the world that the NPT has a gap. It allows nations to produce enriched uranium or to reprocess plutonium and to get very close to the point of having a nuclear weapon. In effect, to have a nuclear weapons capability, although not to have the nuclear weapon. And there's a realization today that steps should be taken to try to fix this gap, not by changing the NPT, but by giving nations an alternative to developing their own enriched uranium capabilities.
You know, Iran is a member of NPT. Iran signed the additional protocol. They didn't ratify it, but they signed it, and they basically agree to implement the additional protocol. Iran signed the Chemical and Biological Convention. So Iran signed every WMD on a treaty on Earth. And the Iranian statement from the religious leadership to the political leadership, military leadership, insisting that the peaceful nature of this program. So as long as this sort of activities will be under international supervision, I think that whether the region like it or not, this is a legitimate right of Iran.
We have a clear right to develop our nuclear technology for peaceful purposes and for our needs.
If you were a minister in today's government in Britain, you would be saying quite strongly Iran has every right.
Oh, absolutely.
You have told us that nuclear power is expensive and dangerous, but Iran has every right to have nuclear power. How do you square that circle?
Where you're in this technology, you're in a very, very dangerous area. So everybody looking at it has to look at it responsibly, but Iran has an absolute right to adopt its civil program, to do the enrichment necessary, and the threat to Iran is not really about that. It's a different argument. It's about the politics of the Middle East, it's about the Iraq war, it's about Israeli hostility to Iran.
Taking a step back, many people find it difficult to understand how the international community can deny Iran this technology. One particular word is frequently used.
It's hypocrisy, not to use a nicer word, it's hypocrisy for a country with nuclear weapons to say to a country without, you can't have them, we can have them. It doesn't make any sense. It's stupid. But that is what is happening. Clearly, that is what is happening.
I think this hypocritical argument against Iran, that Iran does not need nuclear power for generation of electricity, is completely unfounded.
I hope that the hypocrisy of the West will not be seen as a green light by other countries, that they will have more intelligence than we have had, I'm afraid.
Do you think that Iran is developing any nuclear weapon?
My sense is that the Iranians would like the option of activating a weapons program in very short order.
We have never had an official position by Iranians to say that we might need a nuclear weapon, if I'm right.
No, that has never been the official position. However, the way Iranians engage on the subject, the way Iranians speak about the subject, no sooner have they said, we do not want one, they remind everybody that they are nonetheless in a very dangerous neighborhood, and that insofar as they don't have a weapon, it is because they choose not to, not because it is not their right to. So I personally think that the Iranians have contributed to the doubts about their position.
I can also see that Iran, as a serious regional power, looks to its neighbours and sees a number of them with nuclear capabilities, including Israel, but also Russia and Pakistan, and also the historic difficulties between the United States and Iran.
If we need a nuclear energy or we don't need it and so on, this is something that the Iranians, they should decide on that. This is not a matter for foreign countries to decide for us. The only thing that Iran is committed to, not to manufacture nuclear weapons. That is the only thing. And they have not done it. My God, they have not done it.
In our campaign, we would say Iran has every legal right to nuclear energy. That is part of the treaty. So they have every right to nuclear energy. They do not have a right to move from nuclear energy to nuclear weapons. They have signed the treaty. Although they could come out of the treaty if they wanted to, like North Korea came out of the treaty. So that's the legal position.
Some people believe that the use of gas for our domestic market, for injection into the oil fields, is such that we should not even export any gas. So if we take this line of thought, we would not have enough gas, therefore, to burn and produce electricity in the field. We might reach that stage. My tendency is that we have enough gas to meet all these requirements. Now, having said this, gas is a finite quantity. It is a fossil fuel. When we use it, it cannot be produced again and again. So if we are thinking, what about 20 years, 30 years' time, obviously one alternative is to go for nuclear technology for generation of power.
If you're going to build up a nuclear industry in a country, it takes a very long time. You can't just send people to university to do a nuclear engineering degree and then expect them to be able to build a nuclear reactor within the next few years. You need a significant infrastructure.
We are advised, in fact, for the next 20 years or so to be able to have about 20,000 megawatt share of nuclear power.
I believe within 20 years, there will be not just a growth in the number of nuclear plants, but in the number of countries operating nuclear plants.
The Iranian president has stated his desire to destroy our ally Israel. All options are on the table.
All options are on the table.
Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror.
Iran has certain obligations it's got to abide by.
We are going through a period of standstill.
Suspicion and hostility towards Iran are deeply ingrained, beyond any concern over the technical development of a nuclear weapon capability.
I would imagine that it would prove possible to have a time limit on the suspension of enrichment, which would, in the first instance, be for X years.
Legally, it's Iran's inalienable right for homegrown enrichment of uranium.
Iran would not forever give up the right to develop enrichment services, but it would do so for a limited amount of time.
The international negotiations have focused on suspension in the enrichment programme. But behind the technical debate, it is ultimately a lack of trust between states on both sides of the dispute.
Over 2,200 man-hours of inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency have completely failed to provide any evidence that Iran has got a nuclear weapons program.
I think it's important not to say that Iran is being asked to give up its rights to enrichment. It's being asked to forego these rights until it has restored confidence.
I think it's not the nuclear technology that is bothering the Americans and the Europeans.
The United States is not in a position to use international law, but it is not prepared to see Iran develop this capability, partly because of these historic enmities going right back to the revolution, partly because of the very close relationship between the United States and Israel.
There is no international legally binding instrument to assure us that this is a fuel. Then the question is, how about Russians? Well, appreciating their cooperation in this project, but the fuel for the first load has been agreed only. Therefore, we don't have any assurance of Bushehr power plant fuel for its lifetime, which is, say, about 30 years.
The lack of trust is rooted in a history of control and deception involving key industries such as oil and Iran's railways, and the coup d'etat of Iran's democratically elected government in 1953.
What Iran is asked to do is to prove a negative, that Iran does not have the intention of building atomic nuclear bombs.
I've always been of the opinion that Iran has the right to try and diversify its energy needs, as any sovereign state has that right.
The terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty do not forbid having a full nuclear fuel cycle. That is correct. The question is whether, in the light of developments since the treaty was negotiated, it is still sensible for countries to exercise that right.
As Iranians, all of us have some emotional and memory and some insights into nuclear technology and a reaction to it. And that follows our experience in the last 100 years or so. We Iranians wanted to build a railway in Iran. And at that time, railway was a highly advanced technology. The companies from outside, they did not allow us. They were not prepared to let us learn and establish railway. We had to use the competition between Germany at the time and the other countries in order to import and have our railway built and not relying on the capital from these companies. They had that mentality that the railway should be a concession. They will have the right to come and build it and so on. And we stood against it, and we kept our sovereignty without relying on foreigners for them to do it. Most of us as Iranians have this emotional reaction that, look, this is the technology, we want to go in it, and you can't stop us, you see.
In 1951, so this is only 2 years before the CIA engineered the coup d'etat against the popular government of Dr. Mossadegh, the UK proposed a draft resolution to the UN Security Council, which was supported by France and the US, which states that the current development in Iran, namely the process of nationalization of oil industry in Iran, is a threat to global security.
Suspicion and hostility towards Iran are deeply ingrained, beyond concern over nuclear weapons. We asked Lord Phillips where this came from.
Well, it's partly from propaganda, but it's partly modern history.
The Shah was a close ally of the West, whilst public awareness of his internal oppression was virtually non-existent. His violent overthrow by mass revolution was truly shocking for many in the West, who saw it as a giant leap away from modernisation towards a culture that was very alien. This drove a political and social wedge that fueled mutual suspicion and hostility. The rage within Iran against the Shah and his backers was soon mirrored by bitterness and fear within America after the hostage crisis in the first years of the revolution.
Iran is represented as being extremist, supporting terrorism, and all the rest of it. And since there's no voice speaking up for Iran, and since also, I have to add, you've had a lot of activity by the Mujahideen. They have representatives in England, and they've managed to put across what we would call a one-eyed view of Iran, a very incomplete view of Iran, the bad side of Iran, if you like, in terms of human rights abuses and so on. All that together has made for an unhelpful context of understanding from us to you.
I think Iran has exactly the same problems as any other country in that respect, if not worse, which is that there's a selective coverage of what goes on in Iran, and that has to do with feeding pre-existing areas of public interest.
When in 2002 the International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed allegations that Iran had not reported activities under its safeguards agreement, alarm bells rang loudly because of this wider context of distrust.
Initially was a real blow to Iranian self-confidence when the allegations began to emerge in, as I say, in 2002. But it clearly dented and harmed their diplomatic and political posture. So I would say in the long term it has been damaging to Iran to proceed in a clandestine manner.
None of these issues, in fact, put Iran in breach of its obligations because according to the safeguard regulations, Iran was only obliged to declare the existence of a nuclear plant only 6 months before nuclear material would be introduced into that nuclear plant.
Why Iran is singled out in this case?
Actually, Iran is not singled out at all, I had to tell you. Certainly we have from time to time had some similar type of implementation difficulties. You mentioned South Korea. We had a couple of years a report to our board of governors about certain findings which we had, particularly in the area of laser enrichment, which South Korean laboratories had failed to report to the IAEA. Same year we found something similar in Egypt, and then certainly the case of Libya, which is perhaps different.
South Korea, being a client state of the US, being pro-US, was not even reported to the UN Security Council. And it completely got away with that. There are similar cases with Taiwan, with Egypt, with Brazil, and all these countries got away with that. Whereas Iran has only enriched uranium up to 3.5%, as far as we know.
The problem in the case of Iran is that we have not had yet enough information to come to the final conclusion whether the declaration is correct or complete. These operations took place during so long period of time, so it might be also somewhat more difficult to get the facts together. But the other ones, we have done progress. There are still some small loose ends here and there, but there is no such similar case. So I don't really agree that it's singled out because of this.
I think the Iranian nuclear issue has been politicized by the US because it provides a convenient issue to launch its campaign for a change of regime in Iran.
But the focus of concern is on Iran because Iran did violate its safeguards agreement with the IAEA over 18 years, 14 different ways in which Iran did not report import of material, experiments, and so forth. So Iran created what Director General Dr. Mohammad al-Baradei, Director General of the IAEA, called a confidence deficit.
This is something that the public also have got wrong information which has to be corrected. For example, the issue of Natanz. You have heard that MKO, the terrorist group, were the ones firstly reporting or revealing this site. I invite you, in fact, to refer to the reports of the inspectors as well as the journalists which have been so often visiting nuclear installations, that if you just pass by the main road towards Natanz, you will see that these buildings, all of a sudden these buildings of Natanz are in fact the side part of the road.
All options are on the table.
All options are on the table.
Bomb, 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 Iran. Bomb, 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 bomb. Let's bomb, bomb, bomb.
Will the hostile rhetoric block a peaceful resolution?
There is clearly an underlying conflict between the United States and Iran, which is setting the tone.
Many members in the board have raised that they believe the dossier should return to the IAEA and resolve the issue through the negotiation and discussion and dialogue, not through the confrontation.
As to whether Iran is currently developing a nuclear weapons program, the Atomic Energy Agency says it has no evidence. A leaked CIA report in Washington last November suggested there was no clear evidence of this. That is not enough for the United States under the current administration.
Iran aggressively pursues these weapons and exports terror.
The US has repeatedly, through President George W. Bush, expressed the view that the US has the option of military force on the table against Iran.
But they just lose sight of these facts, that the majority of the whole world are in disagreement with their policy.
We contacted European and American embassies to the IAEA in Vienna to discuss the Iranian nuclear program and why the challenge against Iran was dominating the agency's agenda, but the answers we received were not always forthcoming.
In order to consider your request, please send us some more background information about your company, both on your London branch and Tehran headquarters, including reference persons in Tehran our embassy can get in contact with. Please email them to myself and my colleague Pamela Preusche as early as possible.
With reference to our telephone conversation today, we have been in touch with the Foreign Office Press Office, and I'm sorry to say that your request is not possible. I did try to phone you back several times today without success. Yours sincerely, Leslie Meyer.
We would like to give the opportunity to Mr. Schulte to give as much description as they want to give for the dispute on the nuclear issue, especially regarding Iran's nuclear activity.
If I agree to have Ambassador Schulte be interviewed, can you promise me that Iranian government officials would have no say in the broadcast? They would have, that it would be fair and accurate, and that it would be totally controlled by the journalists and the producers, and not at all, no involvement at all of the Iranian government? I mean, can you really promise that?
I can assure you that there wouldn't be any governmental involvement in this case. Have you ever had the experience of giving an interview to an Iranian radio and television and it became censored?
No, and here's the reason. We have not done any interviews with any Iranian government-associated media outlets.
Right. If you haven't ever had an interview with an Iranian radio and television, and you have never had the experience of being censored, so what is the problem, and what are you afraid of?
So let me think about this.
Sure.
Let me tell you, we want to communicate to the people of Iran.
Yeah. So, Matthew, can you tell me the final word? Are you rejecting my request for the interview with Mr. Schulte
I wanted to try to make it work, but it ultimately cannot.
I am right in thinking that the IAEA has stated quite clearly that there is no proof that Iran is developing a nuclear weapons program.
I think what's happened is that the IAEA has helped to expose the extent to which Iran in the past and currently is seeking to acquire the kind of capabilities that would make it possible to develop nuclear weapons. And because the IAEA has been so successful in demonstrating this long history of undeclared activities, that has helped to convince not only the US, but all the other big powers, the Europeans and the Russians and the Chinese, that Iran's intent, going back many years, is to develop a nuclear weapons capability.
Islamic Republic of Iran, that all its nuclear activities are peaceful, have been proven.
The difficulty for the United States is that under the terms of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, countries which agree not to develop nuclear weapons are allowed to develop civil nuclear power programs under the inspection procedures of the International Atomic Energy Agency. And so there is nothing illegal in what Iran is doing, provided it is open with the inspectorate.
The NPT bargain balances non-proliferation with a commitment to nuclear disarmament. While the IAEA actively enforces non-proliferation, there is no equivalent mechanism to call the nuclear weapon states to account.
These double standards applications or implementation of, in fact, the political intentions of few members has questioned its, in fact, impartiality of the Board of Governors.
Israel and India have had clandestine nuclear weapons for some decades and now have nuclear arsenals. Israel enjoys substantial financial and military assistance from the United States, and India is set to receive sensitive nuclear technology from them. How can states so freely proliferate without sanction?
In the case of India, they never signed that, so they have not broken any international obligations at all. If Iran were to acquire nuclear weapons, it would be breaking a whole range of international obligations which it freely entered into, which it ratified, and which is part of the grand bargain of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That is the difference between the two.
The situation of Israel in particular and India with the nuclear deal is seen as quite controversial in a number of countries, in particular within Iran, that sees the assistance given by America to the Indians as a case of double standards. What would you say to that perspective?
Well, the whole of the non-proliferation regime has elements of double standards built into it and accepted by all the signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. After all, when they signed that treaty back in the 1960s, they accepted that there would be 5 nuclear weapon states and that the rest of the world would forswear nuclear weapons in return for open access to civil nuclear technology. That difference in standards is built into the regime.
Of course there are double standards in international relations. Ask yourself this: if Iran was, say, France, would there ever have been a Security Council resolution? No, because France wields a veto, hence double standards. I mean, France, for instance, was the country that built the Israeli nuclear arsenal. At one point there were so many French in the Negev desert that Israeli counterintelligence said there is no way we can hide the fact that we have French resistance.
I don't say double standard because, we are mixing now a little bit here apples and potatoes, but, when it goes to the NPT itself, which treaties at the same time also to promote technology transfers, it is to promote, disarmament, or actually it's an undertaking to disarmament, and then there is a verification element.
This is very clear double standards.
All apparently agree with the principle that nuclear weapons need to be contained. Yet those states with the power to check their spread and achieve disarmament seem content to allow their allies to proliferate. Achieving true security will demand a radical change in this policy. Is there a silver bullet that you have to solve that crisis?
The answer for me is not a silver bullet. It is a real engagement, because we need Iran's help in all sorts of different ways. And I think we should also look at how we can help Iran in its energy needs into the future.
Given the lack of trust between the parties, what would a resolution look like? Iran believes that it suffered when it cooperated after the Paris Agreement of 2003. As a result, any new package will need to be more attractive and recognise the rights Iran has to particular technologies. For their part, the agency believes that Iran's position would be greatly strengthened if they were more transparent.
If there is a political will, the solution is accessible and it will be easily be able to be implemented. We are inviting the whole world, not only the inspectors of the IAEA, to come and have a partnership in this project in Iran, and this is the best way to have full assurance.
I don't hear enough from the Iranians about how counterproductive it would be to have a nuclear weapon. I don't hear enough about Iranian theories on nuclear doctrine, strategic doctrine.
In the case of Iran, I think that sensitive forms of both bilateral and multilateral diplomacy would probably lead a great deal further than some of the more rhetorical and extreme statements being made by some of the great powers.
We collected a number of perspectives on what would be required to achieve a breakthrough in this dispute.
I think they have to find a way to stay within the framework of the agency and NPT, but to defend their rights.
The US should stop defying the international community and enter into direct, unconditional negotiations with Iran without any preconditions.
Iran could reinvigorate its commitment to a WMD-free zone in the region.
I believe the only positive way out of this crisis is through negotiations.
I think certainly the United States and Israel would see it as unacceptable and therefore might be prepared to use military force to try to prevent it from happening.
Ultimately, a policy that enshrines discrimination and where the powerful protect their right to bend the rules is unsustainable. The choices between tough non-proliferation measures and universal disarmament, or conflict and proliferation of nuclear weapons.
I think Iran actually has an opportunity in a way to become the good boy of the world in a funny way, because I think that it would be very helpful if the Iranian government said to the nuclear powers, we are not going for nuclear weapons, but we want to negotiate the abolition of all nuclear weapons. So come to Tehran and we will sit down and negotiate that we do not dream of going for a nuclear weapon, and the nuclear countries, including Israel, sit down and talk about their abolition. And to say that you have a dream of a nuclear-free weapon world, I think would be very positive and would help to change public opinion, which is so important.